Hello and welcome to another episode of Being High with Dualistic Unity, sponsored by Kava Brands, the THC gummies of choice for better days and better nights, legally and discreetly delivered directly to your door anywhere in the US, unless you live in Idaho. Sorry, Idaho. Get Kava Gummies online at kavabrands.com/DU10. That's KAVVABRANDS.com/DU10. And definitely don't forget to use code DU10 for 10% off your order.
I am really excited for today's episode. We are joined by a TikTok creator that I've been following for a long time, Riley Kirk. She is a cannabis research scientist, a daily user, and an educator. I do encourage you to check out her content online. We will put all the links in the description after this episode.
Because it is really incredible. If you're new to cannabis, if you've smoked it for a very long time, there's so many ins and outs to the plant, so many things to learn. And I know I have a shitload of questions. So I'm very, very excited to chat with Riley.
Without any further ado, enjoy the episode. So I just wanted to take a quick moment, Riley, and say thank you very much for joining us today. I'm very excited to introduce you to the audience. We have been discussing not just cannabis, but the mentality that one can learn through the use of cannabis, even through the cultivation of cannabis here and there. But there's a lot that we don't know. I'm just an enthusiast. I've been smoking for a very long time. I've been around growers. I've done a lot of weed related things in terms of selling soil amenities and things like that. So I have an overall general understanding of cannabis as a whole, and I love the plant, but there's so many things I don't know. And I've been watching your account on TikTok for a very long time. You are the host of the Bioactive podcast now as well. So I was hoping maybe you could tell our audience a little bit more about what you do, why you love it, and what it is that you're doing moving forward with your podcast, because that's very exciting.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for that introduction. So yeah, my name's Riley Kirk. My background is in actual pharmaceutical science, specifically looking at plants, fungi, bacteria, and the chemicals they make and how we can use them as medicine. So like really studying like traditional medicines and, how they're used. And then over the past like 5 years, I've really been focused just on cannabis and hemp. Essentially, I kind of started in this field just by communicating some of the science around cannabis. I didn't realize there was like such a lack of stuff on the internet, but now with the censorship, I do realize why there is such a lack of information on the internet, because it's bad. But essentially, my goal is to communicate with people the science of cannabis, how cannabis works in your body, how natural products work in your body, and with the hope that as people get educated and learn more about these plants, they can start using more intentionally and use it kind of as a harm reduction tool, like education as harm reduction, so that people don't have any negative experiences, not just with cannabis, but with all substances in general. So that kind of, led me through my career. I studied cannabis smoke for a while in the laboratory at a company. That was really interesting. And now my focus is actually mainly like working with the cannabis community and private companies and academia to try to do consumer relevant research. So, often we're asking consumers, like, what kind of research do you want to see? And then when we go do that research, we show people online, the process through that R&D. And of course, always communicating and keeping people kind of in the loop, because that's what keeps people interested, when you feel like you're part of the research and, you feel like you're making a difference. And then recently I started a new podcast called the Bioactive Podcast, and bioactive just means a substance that has an effect on your body. So it's not just about cannabis, although it's very heavily centered towards cannabis, because that's kind of what I'm known for on the internet. But it's also kind of tying in other natural products, psychedelics, and really trying to get people to understand what's happening in the body when you take in these substances. And then you can kind of better be in charge of your own medicine, extracting your own medicine, dosing yourself appropriately, etc.
Wow, that is incredible. And just to quickly give a little bit of a background with my weed story, I'm very new to weed, so on the other end of the spectrum from Ray, so I have nothing but questions. And
I saw your running videos with the edibles, and I was laughing so hard. I just, side note, those are so funny.
I'm glad you enjoy those. I enjoy making them for the most part, besides sometimes going into, the pits of just fucking waves of thoughts. So I guess to start, and I have so many questions for you, but I guess to start with that, and this is, I don't know, for people, I guess in my life, a few come to mind just in regards to stigma and whatnot. And I'm curious, like, when it comes to THC and cannabis, like I've heard many times, you can't die from weed, like you can't overdose on weed. So how much of the concern about it is like almost entirely stemming from propaganda and stigma versus, in your opinion, in your research, have you found that cannabis can be detrimental if like maybe obviously if you take too much, can there be permanent risks to doing it? Is it person dependent? Are there certain people who maybe are more at risk or less at risk? I'm just very curious about the stigma and basically if it has any merit whatsoever.
Yeah, so I'm really glad you brought that up because about 99% of cannabis is just like propaganda that's stemming from like the 60s and it's just continuing in our society today. And a lot of that is because the politicians are of that age group who was readily subjected to the propaganda saying, weed makes you stupid, it makes you lazy, you're not going to be a functioning member of society, etc. And, those are the people making laws today, which is pretty sad. And, of course, even if you look at, why a substance would be considered a Schedule I drug, there's really two things. One is a no approved medical value. And we have two FDA approved drugs from the cannabis plant. We have Epidiolex, which is literally just CBD, and Marinol, which is just THC. So we have FDA approved drugs. We have, a medical cannabis program throughout this country. Many, many states have this program. And so, that's obviously not true. And then the second one is a high potential for abuse. And if you compare cannabis to drugs that are actually abused, like fentanyl and heroin and meth, the data just is screaming that it's not even remotely in the same category as these other substances. Actually, fentanyl is a Schedule II drug, I believe, and cannabis is a Schedule I drug, just as a little fun fact there. So I would say the majority of it is definitely propaganda and just I think it's big pharma, big tobacco, big alcohol. Like the government is being manipulated by, we won't go down that path at all, but being manipulated by all these different big corporations. As far as the potential for negative cognitive effects specifically, I think there are some populations of people who should definitely be weary about overusing high THC products. If you have a genetic predisposition, like other members of your family have struggled with schizophrenia or some other form of psychosis, like you definitely should just be aware that using high THC products chronically probably isn't a good idea for you, at least without, consulting a doctor or another medical professional. So like that's definitely an area where you should be aware. And, some people who struggle with just like addiction in general, like addictive personalities, using cannabis can increase dopamine in the brain. And that's, has its medical benefits. But also for some, it can lead to that kind of reward response. And you're going to want to keep going back to it. And you do need a certain level of discipline if you are a chronic THC user. You kind of do need to like rewire your brain in a way to say, when I use this substance, like I need to like go for a walk after, get my body moving, or, I'm going to use this for some people, for like a lot of medical people or people who need it with sleep, you don't need to do that. But if you're trying to use it chronically throughout the day, it's good to develop some brain pathways to kind of lead you down a, spot where you want to be after using cannabis. If you want to be sleeping and taking a nap on the couch, that's totally cool. If that's your intention and that's why you're using it, that's fine. But if your intention is to work or work out or go hang out with friends or, be moving your body in some way. You need to train your body to do that. And not everyone is ready for that discipline in their life. So maybe being an end of the day user would be better for some people rather than chronically throughout the day.
That's a great point. I think a big part of it comes down to the gap between where we live most of the time versus where we end up when we're using marijuana, in terms of there being a more relaxed state, there being a little bit more presence, things are a little bit more colorful, taste has a little bit more impact in terms of getting your attention. And if we're coming out of a state where we're never really in what's happening, where we're always looking forward or looking back or worrying about all of our assumptions of everything around us, that contrast can be very jarring, in the same way that psychedelics can be.
I like that a lot. And I think a lot of people struggle with having an appetite when they're not using cannabis. And I think this is kind of in line with what you're talking about, of if you only allow yourself to have food when you're high, then you have this, huge gap between enjoying food when you're not high and enjoying food when you're high. So then nobody wants to eat when they're not high because it just doesn't have that same pizzazz.
Exactly. So there's a certain degree of mindfulness that I think is important with the use of the plant, which goes back to addiction as a whole, right? Like, what are we using it for? If it's an escape, then it's going to end up being a detriment. If it's something that comes as a result of already being kind of fulfilled and where you are right now, then it's just something that enhances that experience to some degree. I'm a chronic user in that I have pigment dispersion glaucoma. I have since I was 27. I used before that as well. And there is so much to be said for there being a level of responsibility, understanding that all the weed is really doing is slowing you down. In that state, it really comes down to you, whether or not you want to get up and move around or not. And so many of us are kind of forced to be on the move all the time, that when we finally do relax, we're like, I don't want to do anything. I just want to eat these and watch that. And I think that that's kind of the point, is that it's worth it to get the experience and to talk to other people in the community to realize that they went through that too at one point.
Yeah, and I do think a lot of people do use cannabis as escapism. And honestly, that can be one of the medical benefits in a lot of cases. I mean, if you're dealing with really, really bad depression, or you have this event in your life where you just can't handle it, like for a short period of time, escapism is okay. But if you're escaping from reality every day for 5 years, that's where it kind of becomes an issue. And you need to kind of reevaluate your relationship with THC and with the plant, and make sure you're using it in a way that's benefiting your life.
Yeah, for sure. I think that intention, I guess it's kind of similar to anything we do in life, and even with cannabis, because I know there's just like such a big stigma out there. And a lot of times when I've been talking with people about it, because even, there are people in my life who, when I post about, smoking or the gummy runs or something, there's still a stigma behind that. And of course there is, but I've started kind of comparing it to like caffeine or something. It's like coffee, like because they'll bring up just these kind of arbitrary stigmas that everyone has about it, about how it, the potential for addiction. And with something like that, I'm kind of like, okay, but what are people doing when they're smoking? Like, they're not being fucking detrimental to society. It's like, even if it was, say, hypothetically, it was very, very addictive, and it's just like, what, people are now more relaxed and more chill and more happy, and it's like, so we don't want to look at that. We just look at addiction, something like that, as this objectively bad thing. And so with caffeine, though, like, people will drink a cup, and then they'll have to go to 2, and then they'll have to go to 3, and there's this kind of push for just more, and we see that as addictive. But it has to just be the stigma behind it for most people, right?
Well, right, because I mean, you do build a tolerance to any substance that you regularly put in your body, kind of what you're talking about. And I mean, there's a stigma associated with a lot of things, but I think for cannabis, it's just like so unfounded. Like, it doesn't make sense, because realistically, what it's doing to your brain is similar to like what you're talking about, either caffeine, nicotine, pharmaceutical drugs. Like, people are taking a bunch of substances anyway. And because somebody chooses cannabis, for some reason you're treated as a lesser member of society when realistically you're less of a danger to yourself and to society compared to almost all these other substances that are regularly consumed by the majority of Americans.
Absolutely. I have the advantage of having about 16 years on Andrew. So I was smoking cannabis during the prohibition against it here in Canada. And I remember in the early 2000s, especially, still hearing people call me a hippie simply because I was smoking weed. Like, there was still this judgment, despite the fact that I lived in Western Canada, which was, cannabis is kind of everywhere to some degree, but nobody wanted to admit it. Everybody did it in secret. And it was largely just because there's this overall opinion that it's bad. And why is it bad? Well, it's illegal, right? Of course it's bad because it's illegal. And it made no sense. But I do have a question because, and admittedly, I get a kick out of the government. I get a kick out of this overwhelming collective need for control and fear of change, and how it kind of manifests in all of our life. You find some very creative ways of creating TikTok videos, of talking about THC and CBD and the plant itself. How has that been as an experience? Because I imagine on the one hand, TikTok is its own kind of governing body, which is annoying. But on the other hand, you just have people who are just waiting to report you.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people who are waiting to report me. But it's been a journey. Like, I never expected to toss my face on the internet. Like, I can't believe I'm still making content. But when I started to do it, it was fun. I never got any videos removed. They were all just up and everything was good. I didn't have to self-censor. I wasn't getting in trouble, whatever. And then something just like switched one day on TikTok. It was probably like a month after I started creating content. And it was just like community guideline. And then a bunch of videos I made in the past started getting flagged and removed too. So I was like, what just happened on the algorithm? Like, did somebody find my page and start like mass reporting, or was it the actual algorithm? I think it was the actual algorithm, because really since then it's kind of gotten not more and more strict, but it's been more of a learning experience. Like, I self-censored for a long time. I used to say like cannabis and like use a bunch of like really difficult words. And then one day I was like, fuck that, man. Like, if I'm going to try to teach people, like, I can't be using the wrong word to describe this. So I'm either going to do it and, keep my content up or take it down, whatever, or I'm just not going to do it. But using cryptic language, it's not helping anyone. It makes us look bad as a society, like the cannabis culture. Like, so it should not be censored like it's a drug that kills people. It's not. Like, we should be able to talk about it. And more recently, I just had a video removed today, but other than that one, it's been a bit better. And maybe that was because I was like really focused on, education only, not posting any like kind of ancillary information about other things. It was just about education. I don't know, but it's been a roller coaster up and down. But that's kind of why I try to make content on different platforms too. Like, I make content for YouTube, I make it for TikTok, Instagram. I tried Twitter. I didn't love that. But that way, in case one of my, accounts gets taken down, hopefully people know where to find me otherwise. And I think that's specific to anyone who makes content in kind of a sketchy area. You should follow them on every platform, because people in our community are getting deleted every single day or banned. So you can support them by just following them on other platforms.
Well said. Yeah, I can totally relate with the flag. I think I was in the creator fund for a bit on TikTok, 2 years ago, and I got banned from it for like a year. Had an account warning for a while, and that was from mushroom videos mostly, because like as I said, the cannabis stuff for me, like I really only started smoking, even I smoke semi regularly, I don't know, like 6 months ago, more
Okay.
intensely. But yeah, with the mushroom stuff, and then with the gummy runs, like those are always getting flagged. Then I'll appeal, and sometimes I say it's just like a caffeine gummy, because for the most part, I don't think I ever really mention cannabis or weed. I just say gummy, and then it'll get added back up. But then got, I don't know, it'll get suppressed and it'll just kill the views, and all of a sudden, the views are gone.
I've also noticed, I think sometimes they're still visible to like some people on TikTok, but it's actually hidden from the majority of people. I had somebody like show me my page from their phone, and some of my videos that said they were up on my page weren't up on their phone. I was like, what does that mean? That's so scary.
On the other hand, who knows what is happening? I made a video saying that Jesus never once recommended the New Testament, and that was flagged within about 5 minutes.
Ooh. Yeah, that's brave. I don't know if I'd get into religious controversy TikTok.
Oh yeah, we've had ads. I've had some videos that we've used as ads on TikTok that get taken down because it was, what was the reason again?
Inflammatory content, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like basically triggering content. So it's it's wild just how much, but then again, if it's in, the categories for these things, as absurd as the stigma is, it's just going to keep having that until the, broader landscape shifts. But
yeah, I mean, I'm just like, shout out to everyone who still makes content in the cannabis space, because it's definitely not easy, but we are such a resilient community that like many people I know have had like 7 accounts and they just keep making them. And I'm like, dang, like keep it up, because that's not easy to like even getting like suppressed. Like, a video is absolute fire and it would have done so well if you would have made it about some other content, but it's flagged and you're just like, whatever, at least it's still up, it's out in the world, and you got to just keep trying, and someday maybe it'll change.
I think so. I'm encouraged by the fact that there are whole generations of people that are going into their 20s right now that can access cannabis legally and without that paranoia and that fear that goes with it. I mean, even just here in Canada, I can just go to the dispensary and pick up weed. I don't have to meet somebody sketchy in a sketchy neighborhood, get sketchy weed that I'm not sure where it came from. Like there's a lot more in terms of a benefit, I think, from using it because of that lack of fear, because of that lessening of the stress, right? But that also makes me wonder if the reason the system is so resistant to this is because of that lack of stress, because that's what drives us in a lot of ways. It's what gets us going to work. Fear of losing our job, right? Not being able to pay our rent, not being able to get the things that we want or need, depending on our mentality. And so all of a sudden you find yourself enjoying the present moment. You're not buying as much stuff. You're not as much in a hurry, right? And so that kind of makes me wonder if it's about the plant at all.
Whoa. I love this conversation. And I mean, I agree. I think we're seeing a paradigm shift happening. And honestly, TikTok's kind of the talking stage for that paradigm shift. There's so many people, you see someone like go up to someone in an interview. It's like, what do you do for work? And they're like, nothing. Like, I just vibe all day long. And you're like, okay, cool. Like that's what people want to do. And if you can make money and sustain yourself, like you should be able to do that. And yeah, I think Gen Z is making huge change. And again, I think as millennials and Gen Z kind of move up the corporate ladders, we're going to start seeing this change. And I can't wait for everyone to get those jobs, because that's really what we need, is the top-down approach, ending censorship, promoting educational content, harm reduction content, like scientific information. We should be promoting that stuff so people can learn on their own. But also just your note about, going to a dispensary and it's just so much easier and safer. And just the fact that we have somebody to have a conversation with now about it, whether it's your bud tender or like your friend who uses cannabis, or there's so many people who use cannabis now, and it's such a helpful resource. I guess I started smoking in high school, right? I didn't know what a cannabinoid was. I didn't know there was strains. I just, whatever Jake had, like, that's what I'm buying, because that's where I buy my weed from. So like we didn't know anything. I didn't know hemp existed. I didn't know how to dose myself. I didn't know like even like safety mechanisms to do when you're too high. And now we have not just the internet, but we have a lot of people who are using a lot more cannabis, like regularly and openly. Like I say on the internet all the time that I'm a daily cannabis user, just to help kind of dampen that stigma. Like Yes, we're in every realm of every job, of every industry, everywhere. Daily cannabis users are everywhere, and we're functioning members of society.
Hell yeah. Fuck yeah. So with that and with I guess in your experience, but also just in your from your knowledge, like when people respond differently to cannabis. Like some people, I know a lot of people say, oh, I don't smoke. Oh, I tried it once when I was younger and it made me paranoid. It made me anxious. Like how much of that do you think is an impact of THC versus how much do you think it's just something they're suppressing? Like that they're someone who is actually paranoid and anxious, and the weed is just showing them themselves, and they see that, and rather than looking at it, working on it, they run from it, blame the weed, blah blah blah. How much of that do you think is impacted by the weed versus just them and them that they've suppressed for a while?
This is such a good topic because anxiety is, something that the majority of people struggle with in some way, right? And to your point, if you use THC products, if you use cannabis products, even some CBD products, like you're going to feel a bit more like open and aware of yourself and your emotions and your surroundings and food and colors and everything. And part of that is the anxiety component. And I think, as you're saying, like a lot of people don't like that feeling of like that wave of anxiety going over them. And like I literally felt anxious today and from using cannabis, like, and I don't usually feel anxious, and I felt really anxious today. And then I'm like, oh, I know I feel anxious because I have a shitload of stuff to do. I'm sorry I keep swearing on this, but because I have so many things to do, and that's like very rational for me to have anxiety right now. Like I have a lot on my checklist, and I should start checking things off of that checklist. And I think a lot of people, who struggle with general anxiety, but have like panic attacks or something like really severe, I don't think those people should use cannabis right now at like high THC doses. If you want to try a product to make you feel better, I would essentially recommend microdosing THC so that you really don't feel the like super impactful, heavy hitting high in anxiety from cannabis, but you can still have a little bit of that like suppression of anxiety that you get at low doses. So THC is, what you call a biphasic response. Bi meaning two and phases. So at low doses, it causes one response, and at high doses, a very different response. So when we think about that with anxiety, at low doses, it can be anxiolytic. It can help relieve anxiety, but at high doses, it absolutely generates anxiety. And if you're someone who's already anxious, yeah, checking things off your list and doing that can help. But for some people, it can just result in like debilitating anxiety where they can't get anything done and they just feel like trapped. So I think it's a balancing act, but I would agree. I think most of the time, if you're not a super anxious person and you start feeling that anxiety when you're using cannabis, it might be because you have a lot of things to do. You're really busy. Your body's telling you have a lot of things to do. And like, that's something you can kind of work through by like, maybe even if I feel that way, I will smoke and then go do a couple of the things. I'm like, okay, I feel better. I sent those emails. I followed up with those people. But anxiety is it's a difficult topic because like everything, it's a huge spectrum. Some people have really, really bad anxiety and definitely need to be careful with THC products, high THC products. But most people can benefit from a really, really low dose of THC, even if you suffer with anxiety.
I find that really interesting, what you were saying about there being two different impacts depending on whether it's a low dose or a high dose. And the same is very much true with psychedelics. Low dose, all of a sudden there's just less of what you think about most of the time, and then in a high dose, all of a sudden you find yourself in the middle of a state of confusion with the urge to panic possibly. And it's
Yeah.
so interesting because anxiety, to me, when you stop labeling it anxiety, it really is just a feeling, and you're not sure what to do with that feeling, but all of a sudden there are more considerations, which I think is why it's helpful to get things off your list, because then there's not so many unknowns that are still in the air. And I think that's what it is we're dealing with uncertainty to a greater degree because life is uncertain, and most of the time we're all clinging to an idea of what's going to happen next, and we don't really know, and we try to convince ourselves, but we don't really know. And so there's this urge to panic or to try and avoid that. And so on cannabis, we just become more present, which means we have less certainty. We're not looking forward as much, right? And same with psychedelics at a larger dose. And so I find it so very interesting that if you look at it for what it is, it's a spectrum somewhere between being stressed or relaxed in response to uncertainty from moment to moment to moment, in which case we can learn a lot just from the use, the gradual use of cannabis, the gradual increase of dosages, even to look at it almost as we would like going to space in terms of larger doses. You really are, kind of bootstrapping yourself for an entirely different experience. And it's largely just because you're uncertain and you have to have faith in yourself.
Yes, I think, the fear of the unknown and the faith of the unknown, like that's kind of, what you're talking about. And I do agree that fear of the unknown is a lot of what people struggle with anxiety and thinking that they can like line up their whole life by doing something, but there's nothing you can do other than like pursue your passions that, like that can help you get there, which, it's all about mindset, and it can be really daunting, especially if you're in a place in your life where you're not happy and you'll do anything to get somewhere else. I think that's a stressful situation for anyone and can lead you down a pretty negative mind space.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And that uncertainty and, uncertainty, reality, freedom, it all kind of goes hand in hand. And it's most things are our avoidance of that state of uncertainty and the willingness to recognize that I actually don't know where this is going. I don't know what's to come. I don't know anything really, like put anything after that statement. And that's the reality almost always. So with, you mentioned with your experience that you started a bit when you were younger, and I'm curious just because in my experience with, at least with edibles, I had two experiences in college. I took them like 3 times in college. 2 of them were 2 of the worst experiences of my life. Like straight up, like went ghost white one time, went totally green another time, threw up a bunch, and was just like paranoid as fuck, anxious as fuck, freaked out. And I don't know the dose. So I'm not sure if it was like a wicked high dose or what it was exactly, but found myself now, and so basically after that, I was afraid of gummies. Like It was one of my bigger fears was like that shit. Because at the time, without really realizing it, but looking back, I certainly recognized that I was way more tense. I was way more stressed. I was way more concerned about everything and basically my perception and how I was perceived by people, despite thinking that I wasn't as much. And so, and I didn't smoke that much. And so edibles definitely brought that up. But now I can get a lot of the same feelings. I kind of get a lot of those, but I don't have the same degree of concern about them. I don't get as worked up about seeing all of those things. And so I'm curious in your experience and just when you first started using cannabis, how that was, and if you've seen a shift in your response to it as maybe your mentality has shifted as you've grown up or things have changed in your life.
Wow. Yes, definitely. But I also want to say, like, I bet that was a high dose of edibles. And edibles do affect people differently compared to other consumption methods like smoking, because your body processes it and actually changes the THC into a metabolite of THC, which is a little bit stronger in the brain. And some people just react very differently to edibles compared to other consumption methods. And even like during the smoking process, some of that THC is actually converted to other molecules. So it's sometimes like a little bit less strong, even on top of that. But I mean, I know you're an edible person now, so, or at least partly. So, I mean, maybe it's not that, but just that was a side note. My like relationship with cannabis in general has changed a lot over the years. I think it's gone a lot more or less of recreational and more of medical as I kind of get older. And I mean, I still consider myself part-time recreational user, but when I first started using when I was like 14, I just didn't know why I was using it. It just made me feel better. And like, so I just kept doing it and hanging out with people who reacted really well to it. And that was just kind of like the stoner crowd in high school. But, a few years later, I realized that I hadn't had any seizures since I started using cannabis regularly. And I had them when I was kind of growing up and younger. And then I kind of started to read more on it. And of course, like, this is where the data came out that Epidiolex is used as a seizure medication, and that's literally CBD. And, I think part of the reason I struggled with that when I was younger was some sort of dysregulation in the system in the body that cannabis interacts with, called the endocannabinoid system. So that kind of, when I started getting older, I started to realize that using cannabis, using THC products at lower doses regularly made me feel better consistently. And that's kind of when I started almost like a dosing regimen. It's not strict or anything, but like, that's when I really was like, yeah, I'm a daily cannabis user, and I like not need to use every day, but like, it definitely helps me feel better, both mentally, physically. Like, I definitely benefit from this plant a lot. And, from that point, and just like educating myself more, not just like through academic institutions, but even in my free time, like learning about how plants interact with the body, learning specifically how cannabis interacts with the body, and then, building on that knowledge through graduate school and comparing that to other drugs and how safe cannabis really is compared to even other medicinal plants. Like, cannabis is incredibly safe compared to other drugs and other natural products. So yeah, over time, I've definitely used it in, recreation settings. Like, a lot of my friends, we don't love to drink a lot anymore. So we will smoke like 10 joints and just have a good time. Like, that's our good time now. So, and some other substances sometimes. But that's kind of what I'm just more cannabis focused, and I'm like totally okay with myself being a regular cannabis consumer, and like being able to just talk about that and talk about the medical benefits.
So in regards to understanding the benefits and kind of getting that understanding as opposed to more of the recreational use, just like, holy shit, there's so many benefits to that. Like, that's really the spot I'm in now. Like, last year is more mushrooms and like getting a big hit of like understanding, like, well, holy shit, like everyone's wrong about this shit, and just being so curious. And so with cannabis, and especially when it comes to the medicinal side and like, pharmaceuticals, that for me makes a lot of sense why it's illegal. Like, so much money made off of the pharmaceutical industry for politicians, for most rich people, and so I'm curious, because as I'm starting to learn more and more about the benefits, it's like there's so many benefits in so many different ways of the hemp plant and the marijuana plant and just cannabis in general. And so do you think with the rise of big pharma that like cannabis could replace almost, maybe not all, but most pharmaceutical drugs, and like the benefits that we get from those that have so many fucking side effects, we could get almost all, if not most, of the benefits from some use case of cannabis without so many side effects?
I do. I mean, I do think there's still a place for some pharmaceutical drugs, like very specific ones. But I do agree that I think the majority of pharmaceutical drugs could at least in part be replaced, even lessening the dose. Which we have evidence for, that even with like opiates, whereas some people like need to be prescribed opiates at some point during, say it's a surgery or something like that. There's evidence that including cannabis can significantly reduce the amount of opioids that someone needs, which can help, be a preventative medicine for the opioid epidemic. Like, we have a huge problem in this country, and we have evidence that cannabis can help for these people that are struggling with either the addictive aspect of it or the medical aspect of it, because a lot of people who start using opiates and get addicted are chronic pain patients, and they started using opiates because they needed relief from that pain. And they needed something that made them feel good. And we have a lot of evidence that now that cannabis can help with chronic pain. That's one of the best documented and researched subjects for medical cannabis. And then help somebody wean off the opiates, because that's painful in itself. It can be really make people really nauseous. It can make their whole body ache. And cannabis is one of the best things for nausea. And we don't have a ton of anti-nausea drugs. It's not a super well-known like mechanism, and we don't have great animal studies for it. But I mean, I'm sure you both know, and I sure know, that when you're feeling sick, cannabis can be like one of the absolute only things that helps. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of good evidence of why Big Pharma would hate the cannabis industry. But you just kind of hope that maybe small pharma will come through or something and be able to help everyone understand that like we really need to stop pushing pills in this country. We need to start healing people, because it's very sad what's happening to the healthcare system in this country.
And it really is a reflection, again, of a certain degree of fear versus enthusiasm. I mean, the cannabis community is just brimming with enthusiasm because they recognize exactly everything that you've both been saying in terms of the benefits, in terms of how much society is very much stepped away from things that would have less of a negative impact on us, and how much we've overinvested in the pharmaceutical industry. But the pharmaceuticals are largely invested in by people because they're afraid. And there's the promise of a quick solution to the thing that you're afraid of. And so there's a different mentality in that as well. I do have a quick question, because I'm very interested in some of the coolest research maybe that you're aware of. But I have a question regarding, I guess, the subjective experience related to cannabis. Do you know of any research in regard to how our subjective experience of our body is also influencing, say, the increased healing capacity of our body? Do we have some impact or any degree of change to how efficient the placebo effect is under cannabis use, because we'd be more present, we'd be more involved with whatever it is that we fall with?
I'm not aware of any research there, but this is such a good point, because the placebo effect by itself is impactful. I mean, we've seen a lot of people have a lot of healing experiences from just the placebo effect. Now I want to do this research because this sounds so interesting. Yeah, to have like, you know, how does cannabis or THC use in general like impact the ability of the placebo effect to be efficacious in certain conditions? Yeah, I'm going to take a mental note of that and hopefully move forward someday.
I would be very excited to hear how that goes, because there almost has to be an impact.
And just the mind-body connection in general, which is why a lot of people do use cannabis while they're working out, because they feel their body, like every component, every isolated muscle, you know, when you're working out. So, you know, having that connection, and actually that's why some people actually don't like cannabis, is because they're too in their mind and they can't get out of their mind, which is, I mean, reasonable, but definitely always try a lower dose if you have something like that happen. But yeah, I mean, I think that has some rationale for that, for the placebo effect with spirituality, because it definitely, I think we do have legitimate research showing that it enhances the spirituality aspect and the community aspect from using it, which is in line with placebo for sure.
That's awesome. Thank you for entertaining that thought experiment of mine.
I love that.
Back to my original question, though, some of the coolest research that maybe you've run across or are involved with right now.
Ooh, well, I am doing this is just a fun experiment, a specific CBN experiment with smoking. So we're actually planning that for the end of this month. And it's essentially going to investigate like how the size of your joint relates to the amount of CBN produced while you're smoking, because THC converts to CBN during the smoking process. So essentially we're like, if at the end of that challenge cone, is it like 90% CBN, if that's just getting converted and like accumulated throughout the process? And if you want more like specific THC, should you like be rolling little pinners and just like, you know, smoking those? So this is just a fun experiment we're working on. And the point of this one too is like, again, to like record videos while you're doing it, which you're not always allowed to do in like research labs. But that's like part of this proposal, and like show people what we're doing, because there's like a cool smoking apparatus. It's just cool, you know. It's kind of just research people would care about.
That is
So
awesome. It kind of
yeah,
similar to the roach research that you were doing recently.
yes, roaches. And that was kind of the so it's called Roaches for Research. That was kind of the initial experiment that definitely got I was talking about that experiment when we started planning this next one, because I mean the chemistry of roaches, like the end of your joint, it's really interesting. It's specifically it's heavier terpenes. It's way more CBN than starting material. And, there's been this kind of folklore in the industry for a long time that, smoking roaches feels different. And everyone's like, yeah, it tastes like shit. That's why it's different. And we're like, no, like what's the chemistry behind that? Like, there's got to be a reason it makes you feel different. So that's kind of led to that experiment.
That's really cool. And I'm curious because I'm not familiar with that transition. You said THC to CBN, that is a shift. Is that how your body breaks it down? Like it doesn't actually break down THC?
Nope. So that's actually before it even reaches your body. That's like when you light a joint on fire, that fire is like the catalyst for converting THC to CBN. So even if you're like vaping at relatively high temperatures, like you're still going to get some of that conversion. But that would also happen like if you're someone who dabs or you have just flower, if you just like leave it out in the light or like heat or just like oxygen in general, like the THC is slowly going to be converting to CBN. So if you have really, really old weed, it might feel different, maybe like a little more body high, like relaxing. That might be the CBN because it's kind of accumulated over time as the THC broke down.
So do you smoke both? Is the THC and the CBN being ingested? And like, what are the difference? Is there a difference in impact between the two of them?
There is a difference. So I'll preface this with saying we don't know a lot about CBN, but I'm happy to share what we do know about CBN. So yes, both are entering your body. So you're smoking, and both, there's still going to be more THC than CBN, but that's still going to enter your body. And both of them act on your cannabinoid 1 receptor, which is the receptor that makes you feel high and euphoric and like responsible for a lot of the medicinal effects from cannabis. The difference here, specifically at this receptor, is CBN actually acts more weakly compared to THC. So THC like fully like binds to and activates, actually technically it's not fully, but you know what I mean, stronger, activates that receptor compared to CBN, which does it at like, I think it's like 1/3 of that activity. There's been a lot of just word of mouth and people saying anecdotally that CBN makes you feel sleepy, helps you stay asleep. But we recently had a review paper published saying, hey, we really don't have any data to substantiate that. But I mean, community stories are still important. And it's been, you'll see a ton of cannabis sleep products marketed with CBN in them. So part of the issue is the marketing just kind of took off with it before the research backed it up at all. So we don't really know, but even its ability to activate that CB1 receptor, there's enough rationale there that it at least helps with sleep a bit, because that's really why THC helps you with sleep as well, is activation of that receptor and manipulating your circadian rhythm. So it likely CBN is still through that receptor system, but we don't know if it might act on a different receptor as well, or if there's more to that pharmacology story than just the CB1 receptor.
Wow, that's really interesting. And so then with if you take a gummy or an edible, it's not being lit. You said that was kind of what stoked the transition. So does that mean that when you eat a gummy that it's just THC and no CBN, or is there some CBN added typically to have that?
It's a great question.
Impact?
So for most gummies, it's going to mean there's no CBN. Although some companies will add in CBN, but they're adding it like as an isolated molecule. They're adding it into their gummy mix and then making gummies. It's not like it's produced through the process. With that being said, So this is where it gets kind of difficult, because a lot of people who make edibles are using what we call like THC distillate. So it's essentially like pure THC that they add into the gummies and then make a gummy so that it doesn't taste like a plant material. So it's like a lot more, you can make it taste like a watermelon sour candy, whatever. But some people are making gummies that they make by taking the flower and activating it in an oven. So you heat it up and then you extract it and you put it into your gummies. So if you were to make it that second way, the heat from the oven could cause a little bit of a conversion, but it's not going to be to the same level as the heat of directly lighting a joint with a flame, which could be like 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, up to. And that's not what you're putting in your oven. That would be crazy. So there's a lot more heat involved, so there's a lot more conversion happening with the smoking process. But so in your body, if you had like a regular watermelon sour candy edible that had just THC in it, what would happen there is you eat that gummy, your liver metabolizes it, changes the THC into a different molecule called 11-hydroxy-THC. And that's the molecule that's then circulating your body and getting to your brain and making you feel high. And that's part of the reason why it takes a while to feel edibles, is your body needs to process it before it reaches your brain and you can feel those effects.
So then the difference with smoking would be that it impacts it more quickly. But then I'm also curious, just with a gummy and the impact, not just from the digestion, but just from, well, I guess it is from digesting in your stomach versus smoking it into your lungs. The difference between gummies and then smoking like a joint, just flower, versus vaping, if there's like some noticeable differences both in impact and just in the science behind how our body takes it in.
Well, I'll start by saying not everyone can feel edibles. And this is actually data that we acquired on social media, on TikTok and on Instagram. And our data showed that up to 20% of people can't feel edibles, which is substantial. And what was funny is we were talking to other medical professionals after, and one of the physicians, before we even said this, said that he said about 20% of his medical patients can't feel edibles. So that could be a multitude. We don't know the exact reason why people can't feel edibles, but it likely has to do with how our body's processing it, whether it's the enzyme in the liver that's not properly processing it and converting it. It could even be a specific person's gut microbiota, like the literal microbes in their gut. It could have to do with your gallbladder's ability to absorb fats and process in that way. So there's a lot of different factors that could go into why someone might not feel edibles. But that's one thing. And also some people feel edibles extremely, extremely strongly, which is another, part of that spectrum. So some people might not want edibles in that way. But yes, you feel smoking. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just have one quick question in regards to gummies. Is that so the people who can't feel it, that 20%, is that like they can't feel it, period, even if they take like 1,000 milligrams of THC?
Yeah, in general, people can't feel it at all. But some people will be like, oh, I have to take 500 milligrams to feel anything. And I'm like, you should stop doing that, because that's a lot of milligrams of THC to put in your body for your body to process for no reason. So switch up your consumption method. I think this is where like maybe vaping or smoking would be a better method.
I had one more follow-up too, because I heard once when I was talking to someone who, I think it was a founder of like some gummy brand or drinkable THC brand, they were talking about how genetically we have a different predisposition to our response to gummies. So for someone, it could be 100 milligrams impacts them the same exact way as someone who takes 10 milligrams. And it's just because of, I don't know if it's the endocannabinoid system or it's some thing that, our body responds in the way that it's just genetic. So I'm curious if
that would probably have to do with like genetically how your liver enzymes are functioning. So some people have different like forms of these enzymes. Some people have enzymes that work a lot faster and a lot better. Some people have enzymes that are a little bit different and work slower and, less efficiently. And this is also, so that's kind of the genetic component, because that's like in your DNA as far as your ability to produce and process things like that. So it could be very different. But if you do have a really slow metabolism and you're someone who's taking a lot of product, it's something to be aware of if you're also taking pharmaceutical drugs, because essentially what's happening, if you are really slow at metabolizing, those pharmaceuticals are circulating in your body, and you have a ton of THC circulating in your body now. And oftentimes it's the same enzyme in your liver that needs to process both of those things. So you're just overwhelming those enzymes in your liver by making it process 500 milligrams of THC and Lipitor and, you know, an anti-anxiety medication, et cetera. Like you don't want to overwhelm them. But you also can go to websites like drugs.com and actually learn like how certain drugs are processed and see if there's overlap there and if that's something you should be concerned about. Oh, as far as like onset, also like time. So when you're smoking or vaping, you're absorbing the active compounds like directly in your lungs, and then it's immediately going to your brain and your bloodstream. Like it's immediate. So the peak effect from smoking is within 7 minutes, that's your peak effect. You're going to feel it within like 1 minute, but your peak effect within 7 minutes. Which is why some people, if you do struggle with something like anxiety or these other conditions, some people do prefer smoking because it's easier to titrate your dose. You can take like one hit and then be like, okay, how do I feel? Am I good? Do I need a little more? You know, you can wait a couple minutes and be like, okay, I'm going to wait 30 minutes and then take another hit. And you can kind of build that. Whereas edibles, it's like, oh, I'm fine. Oh my God, I'm way too high. Like I'm going to die. Not really, because nobody dies. But I mean, that's why people go to the emergency room, is they feel like the world is caving in, and you can feel your heartbeat, you know, increasing. For older people specifically, like it can be very, very overwhelming. And kind of your college story about, I don't know what milligram it is. Like that's so relatable to so many people, including myself. And I'm usually like the edible tester in my friend group. Like if there's a homemade product, I'm like, all right, give me a bite. I'll tell you approximately what we're dealing with here. Because I know I'm somebody who's so comfortable like in my brain with weed that I'm not going to have a horrific experience. I'm not going to be overwhelmed with anxiety. I'm not going to feel that way. I'm just going to be like, whoa, like I'm really high right now, which is fine because I'm comfortable in that situation. But for people trying cannabis products for the first time, you know, this is why you probably should buy that product from a dispensary. So, you know, this cube has 5 milligrams in it. Maybe you want to start with just 2.5 milligrams, cut that in half, take it, don't take it anymore for that night and just be like, how do I feel? Then the next day you can always increase that, etc. But homemade edibles are not the first stepping stone for somebody trying to get into their cannabis journey. Unless, of course, you live in a state where you don't have any access to medicine. And then I have a YouTube video teaching you exactly how to do it.
That's awesome. I have another question regarding research. I was just wondering, do you know of any research that's currently happening wherein the effect of cannabis is being looked at in regards to combination with psychedelics? Because I know psychedelics is getting a lot of research right now. There's a company on the island that I live on that's doing research. I'm just wondering if cannabis is anywhere in there that you know of, because I know from experience that I love to smoke a joint before I eat some mushrooms. It kind of sets the tone, sets that state of relaxation, and really makes the rest of the trip far more therapeutic.
Yeah, and have you noticed you can smoke a lot more when you're on mushrooms too? Like you can like chain smoke joints and you're just like feeling normal. You're feeling great. So there's definitely interactions happening there, right? Like that. I mean, there's no isolated systems in the brain, and the endocannabinoid system is literally everywhere, as well as, you know, serotonin receptors and these other receptors that are important for psychedelics. So they're definitely related, but I don't know of any specific researcher that's looking into, you know, the synergistic effects or, you know, how they could kind of play on each other. And then, of course, what are the potential medical benefits with them combined? Because now we're in a whole realm of research that talk about replacing pharmaceuticals. That might replace the majority of pharmaceuticals right there, is having that spectrum of, cannabis on this side and psychedelics on this side. And you just got to find where on the spectrum your right ratio is.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we're actually testing that at our retreats actively right now.
Wait, you guys have retreats?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We just had our 5th this past weekend in Vancouver.
Our next one is in Vermont at the end of August. And then we have another one in Vancouver in October, and then one in the Netherlands in November. And that one's going to be a 9-day retreat. That'll be our third 9-day retreat where we actively experiment and look at the synergistic effects of these two things, as well as how they apply to the conversation that our podcast is based on, which is that you are whole and complete in yourself, that thought is not truth, that getting caught up in thought is in fact where most of our suffering comes from, is the idea that, nope, that's true, I have to respond to it. And these substances are a great way of practicing taking that breath before reacting and allowing yourself to learn from the experience rather than just running from it or running towards something else.
I love that. I want to know more about the Vermont one. I live right next door and I'm just curious. So we'll talk about that offline, but this sounds awesome. And again, like giving people a space, to experiment and to have conversations with like-minded people and to feel comfortable around you. Like, again, like that's the point of the community aspect here. And you can go to someone and you can say, hey man, when I smoke, like I get really bad anxiety. Has anyone else felt this? Like, what do you guys do? And then you just start that conversation. And then that leads to way deeper conversations that you sometimes can't even have with your like close friends, because sometimes you're just not ready to break that barrier. And, sometimes just being around other people that want to heal themselves or change themselves in a specific way is like the most beneficial.
That's actually exactly what we've been doing. The podcast itself, while not about cannabis, is always about the experience of uncertainty, the temptation to doubt yourself, to overanalyze what you're doing, and the benefit of understanding that you can just arrive as you are into every situation, and you will continue to do the best that you can do. And there is nothing you need to do other than just that. And so our entire podcast has been about that recognition, but also the community that builds in just being able to empathize with one another, relate to one another. Somebody comes into, we host groups 5 days a week, wherein we have a lot of community members who touch base with us. They talk about things that they're facing, insights that they've had, and other people in the community who are still struggling with some things get inspired by those people. And we've built a thriving community of about 16,000 people at this point who are actively engaged in this discussion, which is why we started this series about cannabis, because the two mentalities coincide and work together so very well. The lessons are in fact the same.
I have a question for both of you about that mentality of kind of being inside yourself and just like confidence in general. Have you guys noticed that when you do use cannabis, it's really hard to like record yourself or like create any sort of content? Because I've never like resonated with other people about this, but I'll be like, oh, I'm going to make a video. I'll plan it out. I'm whatever. I'm like, okay, smoke. And then I like hit record. I'm like, who is that? Like, that's me. Like, I can't make this video. I look terrible. Like, I can't do this. I don't know if anyone else has struggled with that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Actually, on that, my most recent gummy run, I clipped out a lot of that conversation. I had to clip out so much. I'm just baked and I just film myself and I just talk with no regard for like, this is going to take you like fucking 10 hours to edit later. You may want to just chill with some of that. But one of the things I was going on about was how weird it felt to record myself, in the sense of like the unnaturalness to it. Like there was a subtle like inauthenticity to recording that I think is a lot different than something like this, where it's just the camera's right in front of you and it's just a conversation, where it's like you're talking here, we're talking to each other. On the phone, you're just talking to a phone, to a device. And there was like this deep I mean, I was going through like a lot of whack shit. Like at this point, I was feeling like everything, and like there wasn't much idea of myself. And so I was just like feeling like I was everything basically. And so looking at this device and even sometimes looking at myself, and same thing happens on mushrooms. It's like, you're like, who is that? Because you're not so siloed into thinking you are what you think you are, and you're more seeing reality for what it is. And when there aren't so many thoughts, there isn't so much of an idea of yourself, you don't feel as divided from everything else. And so, long story short, it was very unnatural to film on my phone in that state. And I guess it's kind of similar to mushrooms in that when you're really peeled back, there can be like a sensitivity to everything. So that twang of whatever, for me, I felt like inauthenticity in the gap between a thought and like filming or recording. And part of it was with my mom. So it was like, we're talking about something. Oh, let's bring the phone out. It's like, oh, it made me almost sick in a way that it was so weird. It was so visceral. So yeah, I totally relate though.
Likewise, I kind of started recording videos back in 2005 when YouTube was first a thing. And I remember sitting in front of the computer, just looking at myself, kind of wondering, like, when am I going to start talking? Something's got to happen at some point here. And so I got into the habit of basically just kind of looking off into the middle distance so I wouldn't see myself. I'd get through the video, and then later on, after it was posted, then I would watch it because I felt I had already committed to it. I find that helps a lot. And now I don't really think of it because my perspective has changed so much over the last several years that to me, I'm always talking to myself. Even if I'm talking to other people, I'm still talking to my assumptions based on how I see myself. And so there's really no difference between talking to people and talking to myself anymore. So I just basically consider everything to be self-dialogue. And I really like myself, so I don't worry too much about it.
No, that's good. I mean, I'm glad other people have struggled with this at some point. And I feel like also if you do, smoke or take an edible or whatever, and you look high, and you're making content, like all the comments are just like, she's blasted right now. And it's like, well, yeah, but like also listen to what I have to say. Like it's important. So I think that's part of the struggle too, is like your brain is thinking one way. Like my brain isn't like, oh my God, you're so high. It's just like, oh, we're so creative right now. Like, let's make content, like let's make interesting stuff. But then you look at the visual component of you and you're like, oh yeah, I'm pretty high right now.
Yeah, but it's dangerous to want to cater to the type of person that is looking for that easy out. They're looking for that way to justify not listening to you because frankly, what you're saying is something that might change their life, might change their perspective, and they want to resist that. And the easiest way to resist that is to vilify you, is to find something about you that makes you less credible. And considering the way that you describe everything that you're talking about, the knowledge that you have, and the way that you deliver it, it's very difficult to make you less credible. And so people would have to cling on to the thing that they're afraid of, which is the experience of being high. Despite the fact there's no drop in efficacy whatsoever. I smoke all the fucking time and nobody would be able to tell unless I told them, like, I just got high.
Yeah.
Yeah. It actually, that's a good point. It makes me wonder because a lot of times when you use weed and smoke, like there's a depth to your thoughts, depth to the conversation. And so like when I post especially like the gummy run videos, like I'm not saying anything any different than we talk about on the podcast. And there's so many comments like, oh, dude's got crazy high thoughts. I have the same high thoughts. And it makes me wonder almost just from like a symbolic perspective of how much of that is, our collective stigma, collective resistance to certain thoughts that arise when you're high, and like how quick we are to write them off as, oh, that's just a high thought. Like, oh, I don't feel disconnected from anything. Oh, bro, you're just high. It's like, maybe that's our collective resistance as this, from an egotistical, very, very divided mentality to letting go of some of the walls that we hold on to. Like how much of the stigma does come from that, and both the resistance when someone's like, oh, they're just high, like, oh, being high is bad, or, oh, they're high, they're just having high thoughts. And they'll write it. People will come up with so many different excuses. And I wonder if it's not a collective resistance, but then also our individual resistance to, some of those depths. And I don't want to look at that because I'm telling myself this story and that contradicts that story. And so I'm going to write them off as high. And like, that's interconnected with the stigma to it, like our avoidance of uncertainty or looking at things like just a tiny bit deeper than we want to.
I love that point because you're so right. Like if you have something creative and unique and potentially impactful to say, whether you're high or not, like that's still really important. And I mean, how many great discoveries and inventions and like science came from people getting high and, writing down that thought or pursuing it further or doing LSD with their coworkers and their, it's not just cannabis. It's so many different substances that open up your brain in such a unique way. And like, you can either utilize that and like benefit from it and, have like really interesting, cool thoughts, or you could suppress them and be scared what like the internet's going to say. But the internet's going to say something regardless. Like you could not be high and create just a perfect cookie cutter video, and you're still going to get comments that are like not positive. So you might as well just create the content you want to and stick behind it.
No matter what you do, it doesn't matter. You could try and live up to everybody's expectations. And what you'll find is that everybody has different expectations. You're always going to come up against somebody who's going to judge you for something based on the fact that they need to. They need to judge you. What I find really interesting, and I've said this numerous times, is that being high is basically synonymous for being relaxed. And in that state of relaxation, we connect with one another, but we connect through authenticity and vulnerability. And often that's what people are running from, is a state of being vulnerable enough to connect to the people that they want to connect with. And so all they're left with is control and manipulation and the need to try and be something in order to try and get that connection that never comes. And so I find it beautiful that the cannabis community is a perfect example of the benefit of relaxation, even on the body as well as the mind.
I couldn't agree more. And I think a lot of people in the cannabis community, people who maybe even don't use cannabis or strangers or whatever would be like, oh, that person has good vibes. And I think that like that good vibes is that sense of like openness that, we're often always open and receptive to ourselves and our environment and other people. And I think people feel comfortable coming to people who are regular cannabis users because we are open, we are accommodating, we will listen to you. And a lot of people, will, even if they disagree, would be able to, at least have a conversation about it without, getting too angry about it. We're very open, or at least like the people that I've associated with, I've seen that trend. Maybe not everyone.
Oh, for sure. And I always find it interesting how resistant certain people who try to maintain that degree of control and certainty at all times and kind of rely upon that, how much of a difficulty they have with cannabis in general. Like there's such a massive resistance to it, to the point that they've tried it a couple times and they just totally avoid it because they don't want to let go. And what they don't realize is the thing that they're holding on to is the thing that's weighing them down. Like they're holding on to this weight, and cannabis is trying to like loosen the grip a little bit, and they think that it means something about them as it's holding them back from just, being free to be themselves, because it's hard to maintain an idea of what you are or what you think you should be, or some fucking bullshit societal standard, and be yourself at the same time. And so if you're holding on to one and cannabis is helping you in one way, shape, or form, even if it kind of knocks you around a bit, it's showing you that self. And once you get through it, you're a little bit more yourself, which is just what you are when you're a little more relaxed, a little less concerned about being something for anyone else, prioritizing your experience. And so it's a beautiful thing that it gives us the opportunity to do so. But for those who have tried to be something for their whole life, there's going to be this sort of inevitable resistance to some degree if that's where they're deriving their value.
And no hate to anyone, but a lot of those people who do struggle with that are often heavy drinkers. Like that's a trend that I see often. And that's back to kind of like escapism. And unlike cannabis, it's like cannabis makes you aware of your thoughts and makes you like more, I guess, comfortable in your brain with your feelings and your body and everything. And alcohol is kind of the opposite. Like it is drowning you out. It's trying to tell your brain to stop communicating and like, just, give me a break and stop. And I think that's a lot of people you're talking about. It's like, and maybe they need somebody to kind of guide them through the process of learning about cannabis. And I think this is also where like dosing becomes really important too, because I've had a lot of people who are converted to cannabis. Like they're like, okay, Riley, like I want to try it, but like I really don't want to feel really high. And like, I really want like, whatever. They're really scared of it. And I'm like, okay. And I give them like such a low dose of THC and like a lot of CBD, a really balanced product. And they're like, that was such a positive experience. And like, these are the minds that are so important to change, like, and give them a good experience. Don't give them a full joint of like a heavy hitting, 35% THC cannabis strain and be like, here, just smoke this and have a good time. Because if somebody were to like smoke that full joint who's never smoked before, like they're not going to have a positive experience. But as the cannabis community, like oftentimes we're curating these experiences, and we have to be so careful with making sure that it's intentional and they are properly educated and it's a dose that they can handle so that they have a positive experience. They can tell their like-minded friends about that experience. And like from the bottom up approach, we can start to like change minds and get people more comfortable and eventually stop using as much alcohol, maybe stop using as many pharmaceuticals, and like really start listening to what our brain is asking of us.
Oh, I'd imagine the impact just on the reduction in alcohol use in terms of just violence.
Yeah, which is, I don't know if you guys know, in a lot of states, when you sign up for a med card, you get a notice about owning firearms too. And the language, and do you mind if I read it to you? It's like right on my phone. It's actually crazy. Because as you're talking about, like alcohol is so associated with violence, like an increase in violence and domestic abuse and like very negative circumstances, whereas cannabis is not associated with this at all. And it says, this is the second paragraph here. If a federal firearms licensee is awarded that a person is in possession of a card authorizing the possession and use of marijuana under state law, the licensee has, quote, reasonable cause to believe that the person is an unlawful user of a controlled substance and may not transfer firearms or ammunition to that person, even if the person answered no to another portion of it.
So it's saying that if someone's a cannabis user, they're a danger if they possess firearms.
They're irresponsibly using a Schedule I drug and should be treated as so. So you can't like get a firearm license in a lot of states. I think this has been recently brought to at least like state courts. And if we get federal legalization of cannabis, this will be a Supreme Court case that I think you could count on.
Absolutely, but no question about alcohol.
Right. That's the crazy part. It's not even about what they say about cannabis. It's that alcohol is fine, which is, absolutely insane.
And probably other pharmaceuticals, right? There's probably not even a consideration of that, overdosing on something. And it's like,
or drugs that make you like sleepwalk and not remember anything that you did for like 5 hours of the night, whether you're like going out and like, eating a bunch of food and then you go drive a vehicle and like, it's scary. And we have documented cases of stuff like this happening on pharmaceuticals. And of course, yeah, people black out drunk, like bad things definitely happen.
Yeah, I was going to say, if I was baked and I knew there was a gun in the house, I'd probably just run out the house. Like I'd get as far away from that. It would be like freak me out to even consider like touching a gun when I'm high. Like I'd be so sensitive to the impacts. And that's one of the funniest parts is like, you're going to be dangerous because, or things are going to be dangerous for you because you're super high walking around. Like, be careful. It's like, I'm nothing but careful. I looked across the street like 12 times before I do it, and then there's that car that's 200 yards away and I'm like, not gonna risk it, and I'll just
better wait it out.
just wait for it. Exactly. So it's, oh man, it's so fascinating, the backwardsness of all
just
this.
The way cannabis makes you so much less angry. Like if I'm ever like really riled up about something, before I send an email, a text, a phone call, I'm gonna smoke a little. I'm gonna make sure I still agree with what I was gonna do. And 90% of the time, I'm like, oh my God, what was I about to do? Like that was so aggressive and angry for no reason. And like, I don't think we have many documented cases, if any. I think we have zero of the opposite happening, where someone smokes and they're like, oh my God, I want to break something. I want to, get violent. Like it's just not the way cannabis works in the body.
Well, and it's incredible to me, especially in the States, given how fond the founding fathers were in terms of hemp.
Yeah, George Washington, like literally growing hemp. And at that time, the hemp, I'm sure, was above 0.3% THC, which is currently the legal limit. So by all means of the definition, he was growing marijuana, type 1 cannabis. I'm sure. So I
Very
mean,
unpatriotic.
that's what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Riley, I have to say, I'm so grateful that you could join us for this episode. I would love to have you back on the show again in the nearish future. For our audience, could you let us know where they can find you on Instagram and TikTok, and of course on your podcast? Where is the best platform to find you there? And how many episodes are you in now? 3, 4?
I'm going to release the 5th episode tomorrow. And actually, tomorrow's episode is about psychedelics and some newer research about separating the hallucinogenic effects from the brain expanding and beneficial effects for something like depression and PTSD, to hopefully allow more people who struggle with these debilitating conditions to be able to dose themselves at home instead of going to like a therapy clinic. So we have the CEO of a company called Solera, a small biotech company, on. It's my favorite episode so far. It's really cool. That's released tomorrow morning. So you can find me on TikTok is where I post mostly, but I'm also on Instagram and YouTube at the name Cannabichem. That's CANNABICHEM. I post all my podcasts on YouTube as well. If you like to watch videos, you can do that. Sometimes hand motions are helpful with scientific things, and I'll put like little snips on the screen too. But yeah, that's essentially the way to contact me. And if I'm ever deleted off one of those, just try to find the other ones and go from there.
Yeah, definitely check out Riley's stuff. I love your content. I'm super interested, as I've been saying, very, very curious about cannabis in general. So this is a fucking blast for me. I think I had like a bunch of questions written down. I think we got to every single one that I was even considering. So thank you
Cool.
so much for taking the time to chat with us today. I'm very, very excited to chat again at some point soon.
Me too. And yeah, I didn't answer that portion, but I'd love to come back on literally whenever. This was so fun. And I love podcasts where it's encouraged for you to smoke before or consume before. Just a lot more chill from the beginning.
Absolutely. And again, it brings across the message that it's okay to do that you can just arrive. You don't have to doubt yourself, regardless of how uncertain or anxious you might feel. It's going to play out regardless, that you can do the same thing with your doubt that you can do without your doubt. The doubt is totally optional. You're going to do it anyway. You may as well just jump in. So thank you, Riley, for being such a good example of not just the scientific benefits that we're discovering, but the benefits in terms of mentality and your state of relaxation when you're communicating with your audience. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We will see you again next time for the next episode of Being High.
Bye, everyone.